"Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The waiter's voice cut through the elegant atmosphere of the upscale restaurant like a knife. Damon Carter looked up from the menu, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry?" he asked politely. But what the waiter didn't know was that he had just insulted the son of NBA legend Marcus Carter, and his evening was about to take a very expensive turn. The crystal chandeliers of Le Bernardin cast a warm glow over the Beverly Hills dining room, where the city's elite gathered for meals that cost more than most people's weekly salary. 23-year-old Damon Carter sat quietly at table 7, dressed in a simple black hoodie and jeans, his Nike sneakers clean but clearly worn. He had specifically chosen this understated look. After growing up as the son of NBA Hall of Famer Marcus Carter, he had learned to appreciate moments when he could just be himself, without the weight of his father's fame. The waiter, Jonathan Mitchell, had been working at Le Bernardin for 3 years. At 35, he prided himself on his ability to read customers, to know who belonged in the restaurant's rarefied atmosphere and who didn't. As he approached Damon's table, his trained eye took in the casual clothes, the youth, the way the young man seemed to study the menu with the careful attention of someone calculating prices. "Everything looks amazing," Damon said with a genuine smile as Jonathan approached. "I'm thinking about the Wagyu beef. Is it as good as everyone says?" Jonathan's expression tightened slightly. The Wagyu was $180 per serving, more than most people spent on groceries in a week. He glanced around the dining room, noting how Damon's casual appearance contrasted sharply with the business suits and designer dresses of the other patrons. "That's quite an expensive dish," Jonathan said carefully. "Are you sure you've looked at the prices?" Damon nodded, unfazed. "Yeah, I saw. Special occasion, you know." But Jonathan wasn't convinced. In his experience, people who could afford Le Bernardin's prices didn't dress like they'd just come from a college campus. Something about this whole situation felt off, and he had a reputation to maintain. "Sir," Jonathan said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "I think there might be some confusion. This restaurant has a certain dress code, and frankly I'm not sure this is the right fit for you." Damon's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry. What do you mean?" "Look," Jonathan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, "I'm trying to save you some embarrassment here. The meals here start at $80, and most people spend $300 or more. Maybe there's a more suitable place nearby." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Damon felt his chest tighten, not from anger, but from the familiar sting of being judged before anyone bothered to know who he was. He had dealt with this his entire life, people making assumptions based on his age, his appearance, his casual way of dressing. "I appreciate your concern," Damon said quietly, "but I'm perfectly capable of reading a menu and understanding prices." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He had been polite, had tried to handle this diplomatically, but the kid wasn't taking the hint. The last thing he needed was someone ordering food they couldn't pay for, causing a scene when the check came. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Jonathan said, his voice carrying across the nearby tables. "This establishment has certain standards, and I don't think you're going to be comfortable here." The conversation at the neighboring tables stopped. Heads turned. Damon felt every eye in the room focusing on him, saw the mixture of curiosity and judgment in their faces. This was exactly the kind of scene he had spent his life trying to avoid. "Standards?" Damon repeated, his voice still calm but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "Look, kid," Jonathan said, his patience wearing thin, "I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's out of their league. You seem like a nice enough guy, but this place isn't for everyone. There's a Denny's about 10 minutes down the road that might be more your speed." The insult landed like a physical blow. Damon felt his face flush, not from embarrassment, but from the sheer audacity of the assumption. He slowly closed the menu and placed it on the table, his movements deliberate and controlled. "You know what?" Damon said, reaching into his pocket. "You're absolutely right. I should go somewhere more appropriate." Jonathan nodded, relieved that the situation was resolving itself without further incident. But instead of standing to leave, Damon pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. "Just give me 1 second, Damon said, his finger hovering over the contact list. "I need to make a quick call." He scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Dad. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Hey Dee, how's dinner going? Hey Dad, Damon said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet dining room. I'm at Le Bernardin, and I'm having a bit of a situation. Le Bernardin? That's that fancy place you wanted to try, right? What's wrong? Damon looked directly at Jonathan, who was beginning to look uncomfortable. Well, the waiter here seems to think I can't afford to eat here. Says I should try Denny's instead. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Marcus Carter's voice came back, it carried the edge of controlled anger that had intimidated NBA notants for 15 years. He said, What? Don't worry about it, Dad. I was just calling to let you know I might need to find somewhere else to eat. Unless, Damon paused, still looking at Jonathan, unless you still know the owner here. Another pause. You mean Philippe? Yeah. We play golf every month. Why? Could you give him a call? I think there might be some confusion about the restaurant's policies. Jonathan's face had gone pale. The conversation was loud enough that other diners were clearly listening, and the name Marcus Carter was starting to register with some of the older patrons who recognized it. Hold on, Marcus said, and Damon could hear the sound of another phone being dialed. Philip? It's Marcus Carter. My son is at your restaurant right now, and apparently one of your staff thinks he doesn't belong there. Even through the phone, Damon could hear the rapid, apologetic French accent of Philippe Dubois, the restaurant's owner and head chef. Dad, Damon said into the phone, the waiter's name is Jonathan Mitchell. There was a brief exchange in French, too rapid for Damon to follow, but the tone was unmistakable. Philippe was not happy. Your manager is going to want to speak with you, Marcus said to Damon, though his words were clearly intended for Jonathan as well. And son, order whatever you want. It's on the house. Damon hung up the phone and looked at Jonathan, who was standing frozen beside the table. The waiter's confident demeanor had completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. So, Damon said, picking up the menu again, about that Wagyu beef. Before Jonathan could respond, a tall, elegant woman in a black dress approached the table. This was Marie Dubois, the restaurant's general manager and Philippe's daughter. Her face was flushed with embarrassment and barely contained anger. Monsieur Carter, she said, her French accent lending gravity to her words, I am Marie Dubois. I manage this restaurant, and I want to personally apologize for this inexcusable treat. She turned to Jonathan, and her voice became ice-cold. Jonathan, you are relieved of your duties. Please collect your things and leave immediately. But Marie, Jonathan stammered, I didn't know he was. You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out. Marie interrupted. You made assumptions based on appearances, and you treated a valued guest with disrespect. That is not how we conduct business here. She turned back to Damon, her expression softening. Monsieur Carter, your father is a dear friend of the family. We are honored to have you here, and I hope you will allow us to make this right. Damon looked around the dining room, noting how the other patrons were watching the scene unfold with a mixture of fascination and embarrassment. Some of them, he realized, had been just as quick to judge him as Jonathan had been. I appreciate that, Marie, Damon said, but honestly, I'm not sure I'm hungry anymore. Marie's face fell. Please, I understand you are upset, but do not let one person's ignorance spoil your evening. My father would be devastated if you left without experiencing our cuisine. Damon considered this. He had been looking forward to this meal for weeks, had specifically chosen Le Bernardin because of its reputation. More importantly, he realized, leaving now would only reinforce the idea that he didn't belong here. All right, he said finally, but I have one condition. Of course, anything. I want to pay for my meal. Full price. No special treatment, no celebrity discount. I want to be treated like any other customer who can afford to eat here. Marie nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind his request. Of course. And Jonathan? The former waiter was still standing nearby, clearly hoping for some kind of reprieve. He looked up hopefully. You can finish your shift, Marie said. In the kitchen. Washing dishes, and tomorrow you will report to Human Resources for mandatory sensitivity training. If you're very lucky, And if you learn from this experience, you might be allowed to work your way back up to busboy. As Jonathan slunk away, Marie turned her attention back to Damon. Now you mentioned the Wagyu beef. The meal that followed was extraordinary. Marie personally oversaw every course, and the head chef, Philippe himself, came out to greet Damon and share stories about his friendship with Marcus Carter. The other diners, initially curious about the commotion, began to approach with genuine interest and respect. But it was the conversation with an elderly gentleman at the next table that stuck with Damon the most. The man, Robert Steinberg, was a retired civil rights lawyer who had witnessed the entire incident. "You handled that with remarkable grace," Robert said during dessert. "I'm afraid I might not have been so composed." "It's not the first time," Damon replied. "And it won't be the last. That's what troubles me," Robert said. "I've been fighting these battles for 50 years, and here we are, still fighting them." "Maybe," Damon said, "but at least now they're being fought in places like this. That's progress, right?" Robert smiled. "You sound like your father. He said something similar when we had lunch here last month. You know my dad? We serve on the board of the Children's Hospital together. He talks about you constantly. Says you're going to change the world." Damon laughed. "I just want to be able to eat dinner without being profiled." "That's exactly how you change the world," Robert said. "One dinner at a time." As the evening wound down, Damon reflected on the strange turn his night had taken. He had come here simply wanting to enjoy a good meal, to experience something new. Instead, he had been forced to confront the same prejudices that had followed him his entire life. But something had been different this time. Maybe it was having the resources to push back, or maybe it was simply being old enough to stand up for himself. Either way, he realized that this incident had taught him something important about privilege, respect, and the responsibility that came with both. The bill, when it came, was exactly what he had expected. $227 for the full 7-course tasting menu with wine pairing. Damon paid it with his credit card, left a generous tip for the excellent service from Marie and the kitchen staff, and stood to leave. As he walked toward the exit, he passed Jonathan, who was emerging from the kitchen with dish soap on his apron and a humbled expression on his face. "Damon," Jonathan said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Damon stopped and considered the man who had tried to throw him out just hours earlier. "You know what the worst part is?" he said. "It wasn't that you thought I couldn't afford to eat here. It was that you thought that even mattered." Jonathan nodded, clearly struggling with the weight of his own actions. "I've been thinking about that all evening." "You're right. The thing is," Damon continued, "there are probably people who come in here who really can't afford it, who are stretching their budget for a special occasion. And there are people who dress better than me but treat the staff like garbage. The clothes don't tell you anything about the person." "I understand that now," Jonathan said. I hope I can learn to do better." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Damon said. "But make sure you earn it." Outside the restaurant, Damon called his father back. "How did it go?" Marcus asked. "Interesting," Damon replied. "Expensive, but interesting. And the waiter? He's washing dishes and getting a lesson in humility. I think he might actually learn something from it." Marcus laughed. "That's my boy, always looking for the teaching moment." "I learned something too," Damon said. "I learned that sometimes you have to use your privilege to fight for the right to be treated with basic respect. And that's a pretty messed up thing to have to learn." "Yeah, it is," Marcus agreed. "But it's also the world we live in. The question is what you do with that knowledge." As Damon walked to his car, he thought about that question. He had grown up with advantages that most people could never dream of, but he had also grown up with the constant awareness that those advantages could be stripped away by nothing more than someone's assumptions about his appearance. The incident at Le Bernardin had been about more than just a meal. It had been about dignity, respect, and the ongoing struggle to be seen as an individual rather than a collection of stereotypes. And while he had won this particular battle, he knew that the war was far from over. But for tonight, at least, he had proved that he belonged wherever he chose to be. And that, he realized, was worth more than any meal could ever cost. 6 months later, Damon would return to Le Bernardin for a business dinner with potential investors for his new tech startup. Jonathan Mitchell would be his waiter, back on the floor, after months of training and a genuine transformation in his approach to customer service. The interaction would be professional, respectful, and completely unremarkable, which, Damon would think as he left that night, was exactly the point. But the real impact of that evening went far beyond one restaurant and one waiter. Within a week, a video of the incident had gone viral, not because anyone had filmed it, but because Robert Steinberg, the civil rights lawyer, had written a powerful piece about what he witnessed that night. The essay, titled "The Price of Assumption," was shared millions of times across social media. The piece detailed not just the incident itself, but the broader implications of unconscious bias in upscale establishments. It sparked conversations about economic profiling, the intersection of race and class, and the responsibility of service industries to treat all customers with dignity, regardless of their appearance. Le Bernardin became an unlikely symbol of positive change in the industry. Philippe Dubois, inspired by the incident and the conversations it generated, instituted the first comprehensive anti-bias training program for luxury restaurants. The Bernardin Standard became a model that was soon adopted by high-end establishments across the country. Damon found himself at the center of discussions he had never intended to start. He was invited to speak at business schools about the intersection of privilege and prejudice, and his perspective as someone who had grown up with wealth but still faced discrimination resonated with audiences across the country. The irony, he would tell students at Harvard Business School, is that I had to use my father's fame to get basic respect. But what about the people who don't have that privilege? What about the young professional who saves up for months to celebrate a promotion? Or the couple who wants to mark their anniversary somewhere special? They deserve the same treatment I eventually got, but they don't have a famous father to call. The incident also strengthened his relationship with his father in unexpected ways. Marcus Carter, who had spent years trying to shield his son from the prejudices he had faced as a professional athlete, realized that protection wasn't always possible, or even desirable. "I'm proud of how you handled that," Marcus told his son during one of their weekly dinners. "You could have used my name from the beginning, could have made it about who I am. Instead, you tried to be judged on your own merits." "I learned that from you," Damon replied. "You always said respect has to be earned, not demanded." "Sometimes," Marcus said thoughtfully, "I think I was wrong about that. Sometimes respect should be given freely, and it's the disrespect that needs to be earned." The conversation led to a deeper understanding between father and son about the different ways they had each navigated prejudice and privilege. Marcus had faced overt racism on basketball courts in the 1990s, while Damon dealt with more subtle forms of discrimination in boardrooms and restaurants in the 2020s. Both were harmful, but they required different responses. Jonathan Mitchell's transformation became perhaps the most surprising outcome of the evening. The former waiter not only completed his sensitivity training, but threw himself into understanding the deeper issues that had led to his behavior. He volunteered at community organizations, attended workshops on unconscious bias, and eventually became one of the most requested servers at Le Bernardin. "I was angry at first," Jonathan would later admit in an interview with a hospitality industry magazine. "I thought I was being punished for doing my job, for protecting the restaurant's reputation. It took me months to understand that I wasn't protecting anything. I was perpetuating harm." His story became a case study in how individuals can change when given the opportunity and support to confront their biases. The hospitality industry, notoriously resistant to change, began to take notice. The ripple effects continued to spread. Other young people began sharing their own stories of being judged by their appearance in upscale establishments. The hashtag #MoreThanMyClothes trended for weeks, with people posting photos of themselves in casual attire alongside their professional achievement. One post that particularly moved Damon came from a young woman named Sarah, a recent medical school graduate who had been refused service at a high-end jewelry store while shopping for a gift for her mother. "I was wearing scrubs because I had just finished a 12-hour shift," she wrote. Apparently, saving lives doesn't qualify you to do a necklace. These stories reinforced what Damon had always suspected. His experience at Libernaden wasn't unique. It was part of a broader pattern of discrimination that affected countless people every day. A year after the incident, Damon launched the Dignity Initiative, a nonprofit organization focused on combating economic and racial profiling in service industries. The organization worked with businesses to develop better training programs, created resources for consumers who faced discrimination, and advocated for policy changes that would protect customers from bias-based treatment. The initiative's first major success came when a national retail chain agreed to settle a class action lawsuit for $50 million and implemented comprehensive anti-profiling measures across all their stores. The settlement included provisions for regular bias training, clear protocols for customer interactions, and consequences for employees who engaged in discriminatory behavior. Change doesn't happen overnight, Damon said at the press conference announcing the settlement, but it does happen when people are willing to speak up, when businesses are held accountable, and when we all commit to treating each other with basic human dignity. Looking back on that evening at Le Bernardin, Damon often reflected on how a simple desire for a good meal had evolved into something much larger. He had gone to the restaurant as a young man looking for a nice dining experience. He had left as an advocate for systemic change. The incident taught him that privilege was not just about having advantages, it was about having the responsibility to use those advantages to create a more equitable world for everyone. His father's fame had given him a platform, but it was his own choice to use that platform for positive change. And perhaps most importantly, it had shown him that even the most uncomfortable experiences could become opportunities for growth, understanding, and transformation, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. The story of that night at Le Bernard had become more than just an anecdote about a rude waiter and a famous father. It had become a catalyst for conversations about respect, dignity, in the ongoing work of building a more inclusive society. As Damon often said in his speeches, we all have the power to change the world, one interaction at a time. The question is, what kind of change are we going to create?